At our family anniversary dinner, my smug brother suddenly grabbed my wrists and twisted them behind my back. "You are under arrest for impersonation," he yelled, snapping heavy steel cuffs on me, while our relatives clapped and cheered. His wife stood on stage holding a fake badge she stole from my car. I smiled coldly at them. "Congratulations," I whispered. "You just kidnapped an undercover federal agent. My name is Kendra, and I am 33 years old. For the past 6 years, my family treated me like a failure because I dropped out of law school to work a low-level government accounting job. They wanted a wealthy lawyer to add to their image of black excellence. They had no idea I left law school for Quantico." Before I tell you how I destroyed my brother's career and sent him to federal prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who secretly won. The chandelier light of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom reflected off crystal champagne flutes and expensive jewelry. 200 guests, including the elite of our community, the entire congregation of my father's church and local politicians, were gathered to celebrate my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The room buzzed with jazz music and laughter. I was sitting at table 4 mid-sip of my sparkling water when Marcus, my 36-year-old brother, marched up to me. He was wearing his full-dress uniform as captain of the local police precinct. He was the golden boy and pride of the family. Before I could even set my glass down, he grabbed my arms. He twisted them behind my back with brutal force, causing sharp pain to shoot up my shoulders. The cold steel of police-issue handcuffs clicked tightly around my wrists, biting into my skin. "Marcus, what on earth are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "Shut up, you absolute fraud," he hissed in my ear. He spun me around roughly so I was facing the silent, staring ballroom. The jazz music abruptly cut off. That was when his wife Sarah stepped up to the microphone on the main stage. Sarah was a wealthy white woman who loved wearing traditional African prints to our church, just to prove how cultured she was. She tapped the microphone, and the feedback whined through the massive room. "Excuse the interruption, everyone," Sarah announced, her voice dripping with fake sorrow and theatrics. "We have always prided ourselves on honesty in this family. Reverend Thomas and Mother Eleanor have built this beautiful church on truth and integrity. But sadly, Kendra has been living a disgusting lie. My husband is officially arresting her right now for impersonating a federal officer to illegally secure bank loans and defraud innocent people." Loud murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Aunties gasped in horror, and uncles shook their heads in severe disappointment. My mother, Eleanor, rushed over from the head table. She did not look at the red marks forming on my wrists or ask if her daughter was in pain. She looked at my dress, then at Marcus, and then she slapped me hard across the face. The sting radiated across my cheek, but I did not blink. I knew it. My mother screamed, her voice breaking for maximum theatrical effect. "I knew that little data entry job of yours was a pathetic lie to cover up your failures. You dropped out of a top law school, and now you bring the police to my anniversary dinner. You are a complete disgrace to this family name." "Mom, you might want to take a breath and tell your son to take these off," I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not cry. "Do not talk back to your mother, my father," the Reverend boomed as he joined the tight circle. "Marcus is a police captain. If he says you broke the law, then you broke the law. Lord knows you have always been bitterly jealous of his success and his beautiful marriage." Marcus puffed out his chest and adjusted his shiny silver badge. "I am taking her into custody right now," he declared loudly for the crowd to hear. The church elders actually applauded him. They clapped for the golden boy taking out the family trash. I looked at Marcus and then up at Sarah, who was smirking at me from the stage. I leaned in close to my brother. "Marcus," I whispered, "I am going to give you exactly 3 seconds to unlock these cuffs. If you do not, this stops being a family misunderstanding and becomes a very severe federal crime." Marcus threw his head back and laughed. It was that booming, arrogant laugh he always used when he thought he had won an argument. Federal crime, he mocked loudly enough for the front tables to hear. "You are completely delusional, Kendra. You cannot even pay your rent on time, but you want us to believe you are some kind of secret agent. Move. He shoved me forward by the shoulder. The metal of the handcuffs dug deeper into my skin, but I kept my expression entirely blank. Panic is what bullies feed on, and I gave him nothing. I started walking. The walk from table 4 to the VIP suite at the back of the ballroom felt like a slow-motion parade of shame. 200 pairs of eyes burned into my back. These were people who had known me since I was a little girl in Sunday school. I heard Deacon Hayes mutter to his wife that he always knew there was something wrong with my spirit. Sister Beatrice shook her head and whispered that it was a massive tragedy for the Reverend to have such a deeply troubled child. Nobody stood up to ask if I was okay. Nobody questioned the police captain violently manhandling his own sister. They just watched with wide eyes, eager for the juicy gossip they would share at church tomorrow morning. My parents followed right on our heels, stepping in perfect time with my humiliation. They did not try to stop Marcus. Instead, they used the walk to air out years of bitter grievances. "Why do you always have to ruin absolutely everything?" my father hissed, stepping close to my ear. This was supposed to be a night celebrating our legacy. Our family is a shining pillar of Black excellence in this city. Your brother is on his way to becoming the next police chief. And what are you? A 33-year-old spinster who could not even handle the basic pressure of law school. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling with that practiced righteous anger she used so well. "We sacrificed everything to get you into that pre-law program, Kendra. We paid for the absolute best tutors. We bought you that expensive apartment near campus. And you just threw it all away to work some miserable, low-paying government desk job. You humiliated us then, and you are humiliating us now. I cannot believe I raised a criminal who would stoop so low as to buy a fake badge just to get a bank loan." I kept my eyes locked on the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite ahead of us. They had no idea that I never failed out of law school. 6 years ago, I was recruited directly out of my second year by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My professors had noticed my exceptional aptitude for forensic accounting and criminal tax law. The Bureau desperately needed undercover agents who could track dirty money without drawing any attention. I fit the profile perfectly. But I could not tell my family that. The highly classified nature of my undercover work required absolute secrecy, and honestly, their vocal disappointment made the perfect cover story. A failed law student working a boring desk job was completely invisible. Nobody looks twice at a family disappointment. "Keep moving," Marcus barked, shoving me again when I slowed down near the buffet tables. "You are going to sit in that back room and wait until I call a squad car to haul you down to the precinct. I am absolutely not letting you destroy our parents' 40th anniversary with your psychotic lies." Sarah scurried ahead of us, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She reached the VIP suite and pushed open the heavy double doors. The room was soundproof and windowless, usually reserved for the wedding party or VIP guest speakers. It had a long, polished mahogany table and plush leather chairs. It was the perfect isolated place for an interrogation, or in this case, an extortion. Marcus pushed me inside roughly. I stumbled slightly on the thick carpet but quickly regained my balance and stood tall. Sarah closed the heavy double doors behind my parents, sealing us inside. The loud jazz music and the murmurs of the judgmental crowd were instantly cut off. The sudden silence in the room was suffocating. "Sit down," Marcus ordered, pointing a thick finger to a leather chair at the head of the mahogany table. "I prefer to stand," I replied calmly, rolling my shoulders to relieve some of the tension in my back. "Skip the cheap theatrics, Marcus. If you actually thought I was impersonating a federal officer, you would have hauled me straight to the precinct. What is this really about?" Sarah smirked and opened her designer clutch. She pulled out a small black wallet and tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of me, flipping open to reveal a silver shield and a photo identification card. My shield. My federal identification. "I found this in the glove compartment of your car yesterday when you asked me to fetch your phone charger." Sarah sneered, crossing her arms. You bought a fake badge off the internet, Kendra. Really? Scam a bank into giving you a mortgage for that pathetic apartment of yours. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her staggering ignorance and arrogance. You broke into my locked glove box, Sarah. That is incredibly bold for someone who claims to respect the law. Did you also happen to notice the heavy-duty biometric lockbox bolted to the floorboard beneath the passenger seat? Sarah rolled her eyes. Oh, please do not act like you have some top-secret equipment in that beat-up Honda. We know you are completely broke. You do not make more than $40,000 a year at whatever government desk job you pretend to have. You use this fake badge to fund a lifestyle you cannot afford. My mother stepped forward, wiping a tear that I knew was entirely faked for my father's benefit. She is sick, Thomas, my mother said, clutching my father's arm. Our daughter is a pathological liar. We gave her everything. We paid for her undergraduate degree, we got her into a prestigious law school, and she threw it all away out of pure jealousy. I left law school because I was recruited, Mom, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, despite the sharp pain in my wrists. I did not fail out. I dropped out because the academy at Quantico offered me a position. I am a federal agent. Marcus let out a mocking laugh that bounced off the soundproof walls. He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning into my personal space. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath mixed with pure arrogance. Quantico. You. The girl who used to cry over math grades. You are completely delusional, Kendra. My father shook his head, looking at me with absolute disgust. Listen to the insane lies coming out of your mouth. Your brother is a decorated police captain. He works with real federal agents every single day. He knows what a real badge looks like. You are a clerk who bought a plastic toy to feel important because you could never measure up to Marcus. The gaslighting was incredible. They had convinced themselves of my failure so deeply that they could not process the truth staring them right in the face. Out there in the ballroom, 200 people were currently singing Marcus praises, talking about the golden child who had to arrest his unstable criminal sister. They were probably toasting to his bravery right now. If you know real federal agents Marcus, then look closely at the badge, I challenged, nodding toward the table. Look at the complex watermarks on the identification card. Look at the embedded security microchip. Feel the weight of the metal. You have been a cop for 12 years. Pick it up and tell me that is a fake. Marcus glanced down at the badge, but he did not touch it. He looked away quickly. He did not want to look closely. He did not want to see the truth because the truth would completely shatter the fragile, arrogant reality he had built, where he was the only successful sibling in the family. He needed me to be the failure so he could be the star. It does not matter what kind of cheap replica it is, Marcus growled, his voice dropping the public good cop facade. His eyes turned dark and predatory. What matters is that everyone out there in that ballroom already believes you are a fraud. Uncle George and Deacon Hayes both know you are a liar. They are cheering for me, Kendra. They are glad I finally exposed you. He stepped closer, pressing his finger hard into my shoulder. You are going to sign a piece of paper tonight, Kendra, or I am going to walk back out there, call my precinct, and have you booked for impersonation. The local press loves a juicy scandal involving a church family. You will ruin Mom and Dad. You owe them this. I looked at the thick stack of legal papers Sarah pulled from her designer clutch, sliding them across the mahogany table. It was not a confession statement. It was a financial transfer document. The real reason I was wearing these handcuffs was coming to light. The mask of family concern was slipping off entirely. The mask of family concern was slipping off entirely. I looked down at the thick stack of papers Sarah had placed in front of me on the mahogany table. Even with my hands cuffed tightly behind my back, I could clearly read the bold printed heading at the top of the first page. It was an irrevocable deed of transfer for the Grandmother Dorothy Trust. My grandmother had set up that trust fund exclusively for me before she passed away 5 years ago. She specifically bypassed my parents and Marcus because she knew exactly how greedy and obsessed with appearances they were. The trust was currently valued at just over $2 million. I shifted my gaze from the documents to my brother. So this is what this whole ridiculous spectacle is really about, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the soundproof room. This has absolutely nothing to do with fake badges or bank loans. You orchestrated a public arrest in front of 200 people to extort my inheritance. Do not use that word, my father scolded, stepping forward and pointing a heavy finger at me. Extortion is a crime committed by street thugs. This is a family matter. We are simply reallocating resources to where they are actually needed. Your brother is mounting a campaign for police chief next year. He needs capital to secure endorsements and run a proper political campaign. You have done absolutely nothing with that money, Kendra. You live in a tiny apartment and work a dead-end job. Sarah tapped her perfectly manicured fingernails against the documents. It is time for you to finally contribute to the black excellence of this family, Kendra, she said with a condescending smile. Marcus is going to be the youngest police chief in the history of this city. That is a legacy we can all be proud of. All you have to do is sign these papers and transfer the trust into our joint account. If you do that, Marcus will take off those handcuffs, and we will walk back out there and tell the church congregation that it was all a big misunderstanding. We will say we verified your little plastic badge and everything is fine. And if I refuse to sign, I asked, tilting my head. Marcus leaned over the table, his face turning red with mounting anger. Then I haul you out to my cruiser in front of everyone. I book you for federal impersonation and fraud. I will make sure the local news anchors have your mugshot by morning. Mom and Dad will publicly disown you to protect my campaign, and you will spend the next 5 years rotting in a state penitentiary. You do not have the money to fight me in court, Kendra. I know exactly how much you make. I could not help it. I let out a genuine soft laugh. The sound seemed to completely unnerve them. My mother crossed her arms tightly and glared at me. What is so funny, you ungrateful brat? She demanded. Your brother is offering you a generous way out of the mess you created. What is funny, Mom? Is that you all think you are holding the winning cards? I replied, leaning back in my chair. I looked directly at my brother. Marcus let us review the events of the last 15 minutes. You assaulted me in a public space. You placed me in police restraints without reading my rights. You forcibly relocated me to a locked, windowless room against my will. And now you are attempting to force me to sign over $2 million under the threat of false imprisonment and malicious prosecution. Marcus scoffed and rolled his eyes. Save the cheap legal jargon for someone who cares. You failed out of law school, remember? I am not giving you a legal lecture, Marcus. I said, my tone dropping to a dead serious whisper. I am giving you a calculated warning. 5 minutes ago, you were just an arrogant cop abusing his power to humiliate his sister. That would have cost you your badge. But right now, by locking me in this room and demanding money, you have officially crossed the line into felony kidnapping and extortion. When my team comes through those doors, you will not be facing a simple disciplinary hearing. You will be facing a federal judge. Sarah burst into dramatic laughter, clapping her hands together. Oh my goodness, she is completely delusional, Marcus. She actually thinks she has a SWAT team waiting outside. Give me the pen. I am going to uncuff her right hand so she can sign this. Sarah reached into her designer bag and pulled out a heavy gold pen. She slammed it down on top of the transfer documents. Marcus walked around the mahogany table and grabbed my right arm. He pulled a small key from his uniform pocket and unlocked the right cuff. My arm fell forward, numb and tingling with pins and needles as the blood rushed back into my fingers. Sign the paper, Kendra, Marcus commanded, standing directly over my shoulder. Stop playing these pathetic spy games and do what you are told for once in your miserable life. I slowly rubbed my right wrist, feeling the deep indentations the steel had left in my skin. I picked up the gold pen. My parents let out a collective sigh of relief, thinking they had finally broken me. Sarah smiled triumphantly and leaned over to point at the signature line at the bottom of the page. I held the pen, hovering the gold tip just inches above the thick paper. I did not sign. Instead, I looked up at Sarah and delivered the next blow. I will sign this right after you explain to Mom and Dad why you and Marcus really need this $2 million. Because we both know this money is not for a police chief campaign, is it, Sarah? Sarah froze. Her triumphant smile melted off her face faster than cheap makeup in the rain. She shot a panicked look at Marcus, who had suddenly taken a step back from my chair. The heavy silence in the soundproof room returned, but this time it was not filled with their arrogance. It was thick with pure, unadulterated dread. "What on earth are you talking about?" my father asked, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in confusion. He looked back and forth between Marcus and me. "Of course the money is for the campaign. Marcus told us the local union needs a massive donation to secure their endorsement. It is an investment in our family legacy." I kept my eyes firmly locked on Sarah. "Is that what they told you, Dad? An investment in the family legacy?" I let out a low whistle. "Tell them, Marcus. Tell your biggest fans why you are really willing to risk a federal kidnapping charge just to steal your little sister's inheritance." Marcus slammed his fist so hard against the mahogany table that Sarah's designer clutch jumped. "Shut your mouth, Kendra," he roared. The righteous police captain facade completely vanished. His posture slouched, his face twisted into an ugly snarl, and the polished golden boy disappeared. He looked exactly like the desperate street thugs he bragged about locking up. "You do not know anything." He spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "You are just a pathetic little clerk who wants to ruin my life because you could never achieve anything on your own. You have always been insanely jealous of me and Sarah. You want to see us fail." Mom rushed forward and grabbed Marcus by the arm, shooting me a look of pure hatred. "Do not let her upset you, sweetheart," she cooed, petting his uniform sleeve like he was a frightened child. "She is just trying to manipulate the situation. Kendra is a pathological liar. We all know this. Just ignore her lies and make her sign the document." I rubbed my freed right wrist, slowly feeling the blood flow returning to my fingers. The sheer delusion of my parents was staggering, but it was also the perfect shield for my undercover investigation. Their blind faith in Marcus had allowed him to operate right under their noses for years. "If I am lying, Mom, then why is Marcus sweating?" I asked softly. "Why is his heart beating so fast I can see the pulse in his neck from across the table? Why did he not just call the precinct and have me booked for impersonation like a real cop would do?" "Because I am trying to protect you from yourself," Marcus shouted, spraying a bit of spit across the table. "I am giving you a chance to handle this internally without completely ruining Mom and Dad's anniversary." "Do not insult my intelligence, Marcus," I replied. "You brought me to this soundproof room because you are terrified. You thought putting me in handcuffs in front of 200 people would break me. You thought I would be so humiliated and so desperate for our parents' approval that I would just blindly sign over $2 million to make the pain stop." Sarah stepped forward, her face flushed bright red. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You owe us that money, Kendra. You sit in your cheap apartment doing nothing while Marcus is out on the streets protecting this city. We have a lifestyle to maintain. We have image standards to uphold for the church community. You have absolutely no idea the kind of financial pressure we are under to keep this family looking perfect." Finally, the truth was bleeding out. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Financial pressure," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "That is a very interesting choice of words, Sarah. Because last time I checked, a police captain's salary combined with your interior design business does not exactly scream financial ruin. Unless, of course, someone has been living vastly beyond their means." My father stepped in front of Marcus, puffing out his chest. "Listen to me very carefully, Kendra. I do not care what kind of paranoid delusions you have concocted in your head to justify your selfish behavior. Your brother needs this financial backing right now to ensure his promotion. He is the absolute future of this family name and our reputation. You will sign that paper and you will transfer the trust funds by tomorrow morning, or you are no longer a daughter of mine." I looked at my father, feeling a strange sense of pity for him. He was completely desperate to protect his perfect image. "Tell them, Marcus. Tell them the real numbers right now." Marcus stood frozen like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. A heavy bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the harsh overhead light of the soundproof room. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. The golden boy of the family was completely paralyzed by the sudden realization that his supposedly invisible sister might actually be seeing right through his perfect facade. Sarah pushed past my father and slammed both of her hands flat on the polished mahogany table. She leaned toward me, her eyes wide with a manic and frantic energy. "I will tell you the real numbers, Kendra," she hissed, her voice shrill and desperate. "We need $1.5 million for the media buy alone. The union endorsements require another $500,000 in political action committee contributions. Do you have any idea what it costs to run a successful police chief campaign in this major city? It costs exactly what your grandmother left sitting in that completely useless trust fund." I looked at Sarah, taking a moment to absorb her incredible audacity. "So you finally admit it?" I said plainly, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "You are not trying to protect me from a federal fraud charge. You are literally holding me hostage in this room to fund your husband's political ambitions. It is not hostage-taking, it is a necessary family investment," my mother interjected, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Sarah. "Your grandmother Dorothy was a wonderful woman, but she was very old and she was deeply confused at the end of her life. She never should have left that money entirely to you. She only did it because she felt immense pity for you. She knew you would never find a wealthy husband or build a highly successful career like Marcus did." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, not from the ridiculous insult, but from the realization of how deeply my mother had bought into this toxic narrative. "Mom, she left me the money because she knew Marcus had a severe gambling problem in college," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. "She knew he stole cash from the church collection plates to pay his bookies, and she knew you and Dad actively covered it up to protect his precious reputation." My father turned a vibrant shade of purple, his hands balled into tight, trembling fists at his sides. "Do not you dare bring up the past!" he bellowed, his voice rattling the heavy wooden doors. Marcus was just a foolish boy back then. He made mistakes, but he repented, and he grew into a respected man of the law. A true community leader. You are holding on to ancient history just to justify your selfish greed. That trust fund does not belong to you, Kendra. It belongs to the legacy of this entire family. Sarah picked up the heavy gold pen and shoved it so hard against my chest that it left a painful red mark on my skin. "You are a complete nobody, Kendra," she spat. "I married into this family because I believed in the ultimate potential of Black excellence. I believed in Marcus. I have spent the last 5 years hosting exhausting charity galas, attending boring church services, and playing the perfect political wife to get him to this exact moment. I am not going to let some bitter, underachieving sister ruin our brilliant future just because she wants to hoard money she did not even earn." I looked down at the gold pen resting on the table and then back up at Sarah's flushed, angry face. "You really believe that, do you not?" I asked softly. "You truly believe that wearing traditional prints and throwing a few charity dinners magically entitles you to steal from a Black woman? You think your proximity to my brother gives you automatic ownership over my rightful inheritance?" Sarah scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "Oh, please save the tired racial politics for someone who actually cares. This is strictly about power and influence. Marcus is going to be the police chief. I am going to be the first lady of the precinct. We are going to have private dinners with the mayor and the governor. What are you going to do with $2 million, Kendra? Buy a slightly nicer apartment. Maybe upgrade your 10-year-old car. You do not have the grand vision or the social pedigree to use this money properly. We do." Marcus finally found his voice. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped forward, trying desperately to regain his dominant posture. "Listen to my wife," he ordered, his tone laced with a dangerous, desperate edge. "We are not asking you for a favor, Kendra. We are telling you what is going to happen. The campaign needs the money transferred by tomorrow morning. The union bosses are waiting for the massive deposit. If the funds do not clear, our entire political operation collapses immediately. We lose absolutely everything. We lose absolutely everything." The silence that followed his confession was heavy and suffocating. My mother stepped around the mahogany table and placed her hands firmly on my shoulders. Her grip was tight enough to bruise. "Listen to your brother Kendra," she whispered, her voice adopting that sickly sweet tone she used when addressing the church congregation. "We cannot let that happen. You know how hard this family has worked to get where we are. We are the pinnacle of Black excellence in this community. When people look at us, they see success, they see faith, and they see power." I tried to shrug off her grip, but she dug her perfectly manicured nails into my skin. "Mom, you are talking about committing a federal crime just to buy a promotion," I said, staring straight ahead at the blank soundproof wall. "You are literally helping them steal my inheritance." "It is not stealing," my father interrupted, stepping up beside my mother. His booming preacher voice filled the small room, making the walls vibrate. "It is a necessary reallocation of family resources. Kendra, you must understand the bigger picture here. Our ancestors fought and bled for us to have a seat at the table. Marcus is about to take the biggest seat in this city. He is going to be the police chief. Do you have any idea what that means for our people? What that means for the legacy of this church?" I looked up at my father, the Reverend, the man who stood at the pulpit every single Sunday preaching about honesty and integrity. "And what about my legacy, Dad?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with genuine curiosity. "What about my future? Grandmother Dorothy left that money to me because she knew I would use it responsibly." My mother scoffed loudly, releasing my shoulders and walking over to stand next to Sarah. Responsibly, she mocked. "You live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment and drive a car that barely starts. You have zero ambition, Kendra. You dropped out of a top-tier law school because the pressure was too much for you. What are you going to do with $2 million? Buy more cheap suits for your little desk job." Sarah crossed her arms and nodded in agreement. "We are the ones carrying the weight of this family name, Kendra. We are the ones hosting the charity galas, putting up the political yard signs, and shaking hands with the mayor. Black excellence requires funding. It requires sacrifice. And right now the family is asking you to make that sacrifice." I looked at the four of them standing together on the other side of the table. They looked like a firing squad made up of my own flesh and blood. They had completely convinced themselves that extorting me was a righteous act. They were masking their greed and their financial ruin behind the noble facade of civil rights and community progress. It was sickening. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly, making sure the hidden wire taped to my chest picked up every single syllable. "You want me to sign over $2 million of legally inherited money to cover up the fact that Marcus and Sarah cannot afford their own political campaign. You want me to fund a bribery scheme for union bosses under the guise of Black excellence. Keep your voice down," Marcus hissed, looking nervously at the heavy oak doors, as if someone could hear us through the soundproof walls. "It is not bribery, it is politics. It is how the game is played in this city." My father leaned over the table, placing both of his heavy hands flat on the documents. He leaned his face so close to mine, I could smell the strong peppermint on his breath. "You will sign this paper, Kendra. You will do it because you owe this family. We clothed you, we fed you, and we protected you. We gave you a life of privilege that most people only dream about. You will not be the reason our family name becomes a laughingstock." He picked up the gold pen and forcefully shoved it into my right hand. His thick fingers wrapped around mine, squeezing until my knuckles turned white. "Sign the paper right now," he commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, aggressive whisper. "If you do not, I swear to God, I will stand at my pulpit tomorrow morning, and I will tell my entire congregation that my daughter is a fraud, a thief, and a pathological liar." My mother nodded vigorously, her eyes cold and completely devoid of maternal love. "We will disown you, Kendra," she stated flatly. "You will be dead to us. We will let Marcus drag you out of here in handcuffs, and we will not pay a single dime for your legal defense. You will rot in a jail cell while your brother gets sworn in." The sheer cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. 6 years ago, those words would have completely broken me. I would have collapsed in tears, begging for their forgiveness. I would have signed away my future just to keep a seat at their toxic dinner table. But I was not that frightened little girl anymore. I was a senior special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I was holding all the cards. I looked down at the gold pen in my hand. "Are you absolutely sure this is the path you want to take, Dad?" I asked softly, giving him one final chance. "Sign the damn paper," my father roared, hitting the mahogany table with his fist. I did not flinch when his fist hit the table. Instead, I carefully laid the heavy gold pen back down on the polished wood. I pushed the legal documents exactly 1 inch away from my chest. My father let out an exasperated growl, but I ignored him entirely. My eyes were fixed firmly on my brother, who was still sweating profusely under the harsh overhead lights. "Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly, "if I am going to empty my entire future to fund your political campaign, I need to know exactly how this transaction is going to work. Because moving $2 million overnight triggers a mountain of federal banking alerts." Marcus rolled his eyes, crossing his thick arms over his tight uniform shirt. He looked at Sarah with a smug expression, clearly believing I was finally caving in. The arrogance in his posture returned almost instantly. "You do not need to worry about the complicated banking logistics, Kendra," he scoffed. "Just sign the transfer deed. My campaign finance manager has already set up a series of limited liability companies to receive the funds. The money will be broken down into much smaller deposits to avoid any unnecessary red tape from the Treasury Department. You just authorize the release from the trust, and my team will handle the rest of the complicated adult business." "So you are planning to structure the deposits?" I asked, tilting my head in feigned confusion. I kept my tone soft and inquisitive, perfectly masking the precision of a trained federal interrogator. "You are a decorated police captain, Marcus. You know that breaking up a large sum of money to evade federal reporting requirements is a serious felony, right? That is textbook money laundering." Sarah laughed, a shrill and condescending sound that grated against my ears. "Oh, stop being so incredibly dramatic, Kendra," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It is not money laundering if it is for a legitimate political campaign. We are just being smart about our financial privacy. The union bosses prefer untraceable cash contributions anyway. It keeps everything clean and keeps the media out of our family business." "Cash contributions," I repeated, making sure my pronunciation was crystal clear for the hidden microphone securely taped beneath my blouse. I needed them to hang themselves with their own words. "So let me get the facts completely straight here." I looked directly at my brother. "You want me to transfer $2 million from the Grandmother Dorothy Trust into several shell companies that you secretly control. Then you are going to illegally withdraw that money as untraceable cash to bribe local police union bosses for their political endorsements. Is that the exact plan you are threatening me with?" "Yes, that is the exact plan," Marcus snapped, stepping up to the edge of the mahogany table. His face flushed with irritation. "And it is absolutely none of your business how I spend the money once it leaves your account. That cash guarantees me the Chief of Police badge next month. It guarantees this family untouchable power and influence in this city for the next decade." My mother stepped forward, nodding in vigorous agreement. "This is how the real world actually works, Kendra," she stated coldly. "Stop quoting boring law textbooks like you know anything about success. Your brother is making bold moves to elevate our family name. God rewards those who take decisive action. You should be honored to play a small part in his historic rise." I turned my attention back to Marcus. "And what if the federal bank investigators notice the structured deposits?" I asked, feigning hesitation. "What if they trace the shell companies back to your campaign? I am the one signing the initial transfer. I will be the one taking the fall for funding a massive bribery scheme." Marcus slammed his hand on the table again, leaning into my personal space. "You will not take the fall because nobody is going to investigate the next police chief." He growled, his voice dripping with absolute corruption. "I own the local precinct. I own the financial crimes detectives in this district. If any red flags pop up, I will personally bury the paperwork before it ever reaches a judge. Now stop stalling and sign the document before I lose my temper and drag you out into the ballroom by your hair. Do you fully understand me, Kendra? I understood him perfectly. I had everything I needed. I had the confession to extortion, money laundering, and political bribery clearly recorded on a federal wire. I smiled softly at him. I understand everything now, Marcus, I said. But there is just one tiny problem with your flawless plan. You only control the local precinct. Sarah snatched the pen from the table and aggressively shoved it against my fingers. Stop talking in riddles and sign, she shrieked. I pulled my hand back, letting the gold pen clatter onto the mahogany table. Sarah was breathing heavily, her chest heaving with uncontrolled anger. She marched over to the leather sofa where Marcus had unceremoniously dropped my personal belongings when we first entered the room. She grabbed my worn leather purse and marched back to the table. With a vicious swipe, she turned the bag upside down and violently shook it. My keys, lip balm, cheap sunglasses, and a few loose receipts scattered across the polished wood. Sarah threw the empty leather bag directly at my face. The heavy brass buckle grazed my cheek, leaving a sharp, stinging sensation. My father did not reprimand her. My mother did not gasp. They simply watched as my sister-in-law resorted to physical violence to get what she wanted. Look at this pathetic pile of garbage, Sarah screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my scattered belongings. This is your entire life, Kendra. You have absolutely nothing. You are a complete zero. You come to a luxury hotel wearing a cheap off-the-rack dress, with a purse that looks like it came from a thrift store. You do not deserve Grandmother Dorothy's money. You would probably just donate it to some pathetic animal shelter, or waste it on paying off your worthless student loans. I reached up and gently touched the side of my face where the brass buckle had hit me. I could feel a small welt forming. Assaulting a federal agent is a mandatory minimum sentence, Sarah. I said, my voice dangerously calm. You might want to stop throwing things before you add another 10 years to your impending prison term. Sarah let out a piercing scream of absolute frustration. She leaned across the table, grabbing the collar of my dress with both of her hands. She yanked me forward so violently that the heavy mahogany table dug into my ribs. How dare you ever threaten me with your imaginary federal agent garbage? She spat, her face inches from mine. I am the wife of the next police chief. I am untouchable in this city. I will literally beat the signature out of you right now if I have to. Marcus stepped forward, but not to pull his out-of-control wife away from me. He placed his hands firmly on the table, leaning in to back up her physical threat. You are pushing us into a corner, Kendra, he warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Sarah is right. We do not have time for these stupid games anymore. If you think I will let you walk out of this room without signing that document, you are completely out of your mind. I am a decorated police captain. I know exactly how to hurt people without leaving any visible marks. The sheer audacity of my brother threatening to torture me in front of our parents was mind-boggling. I looked over Sarah's shoulder at my mother and father. They were standing near the heavy oak doors, acting as silent guards for this brutal extortion. Dad, I called out, my voice steady. You are really going to stand there and let your son and daughter-in-law physically assault me? My father looked away, staring intently at the brass handle of the door. You brought this entirely on yourself, Kendra, he mumbled, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence. Just do what your brother says and nobody has to get hurt. We are doing this for the family. You have to understand that. I looked at my mother, hoping to find even a shred of maternal instinct left in her cold eyes. Mom, I said softly. My mother crossed her arms and glared at me. Do not look at me like that, she snapped. You are a stubborn, ungrateful child. Sarah is only doing what is necessary to protect our legacy. If you had just signed the paper when we asked nicely, none of this ugly business would be happening. This is your fault, Kendra. It is always your fault. The absolute betrayal was complete. There was no family left to save. There was only a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of religious righteousness and social status. Sarah tightened her grip on my collar, shaking me violently. Are you deaf? She shrieked. Pick up the pen and sign the document right now. I will not ask you again. I calmly raised my right hand and grabbed Sarah's wrists. I did not strike her, but I applied just enough trained pressure to a specific nerve cluster on her forearm. Sarah gasped in sudden pain and immediately released my dress, stumbling backward in shock. I smoothed down my wrinkled collar with completely steady hands. We are finished playing games. We are finished playing games. I released her arm and she scrambled backward, rubbing her wrist with a look of pure terror. I smoothed down the front of my dress and picked up the heavy gold pen that was still resting on the table. I did not hold it to sign the papers. I held it like a judge holding a gavel. Sit down, Sarah, I commanded, my voice echoing off the soundproof walls with an authority that completely shocked everyone. My father opened his mouth to protest, but I immediately cut him off. I said, sit down. For the last 20 minutes, I have let you all threaten me, demean me, and confess to multiple federal crimes on a hidden recording device. I let you do it because I needed to know just how deep the rot in this family truly went. Now it is my turn to speak. Marcus scoffed, trying to recover his bruised ego. You have nothing to say, Kendra. You are just trying to buy time because you know you are trapped in here with us. Am I trapped, Marcus? I asked, tilting my head. Or are you? Let us talk about the real reason you need $2 million in untraceable cash by tomorrow morning. It is not just for union endorsements, is it? It is because you are desperately trying to fill a massive hole before the annual audit. The color instantly drained from Marcus' face. He looked as if all the blood had suddenly rushed to his feet. His arrogant posture collapsed and he took a shaky step back. What hole? My mother asked, looking back and forth. Her perfectly manicured hands fluttered nervously. What audit is she talking about, Marcus? Tell her to stop talking nonsense. Oh, he knows exactly what audit, Mom, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my brother. The annual financial review for the church charity foundation. The one Dad trusted Marcus and Sarah to manage for the last 3 years. The foundation that is supposed to fund community outreach programs and scholarships for underprivileged kids in our neighborhood. My father puffed out his chest. Marcus and Sarah have done an outstanding job managing that fund, Kendra. Do not try to smear their good work just to save your own skin. Have they, Dad? Have you actually looked at the bank statements? Or did you just sign the summary reports Sarah handed you before Sunday service? Because if you had looked at the actual routing numbers, you would have noticed that the donations never made it to the community outreach programs. They were funneled into an offshore account. Sarah let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. She is completely insane, Thomas. Cayman Islands. That is ridiculous. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was a printed copy of a wire transfer receipt. I tossed it onto the mahogany table right on top of the deed for my trust fund. Is it ridiculous, Sarah? I asked. Because my forensic accounting team traced exactly $4 million moving from the church charity fund into an offshore shell company named after your maiden name. The silence was completely suffocating. My father slowly reached out with trembling hands and picked up the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and stared at the numbers printed on the page. His eyes widened in absolute horror. Marcus! My father whispered, his voice cracking. What is this? Tell me this is a forged document. Marcus could not speak. His chest was heaving and a thick layer of sweat coated his forehead. He looked frantically at Sarah, who was clutching her designer bag to her chest like a life preserver. I will tell you what it is, Dad. I said, my voice steady and unforgiving. It is federal wire fraud. It is embezzlement. And it is the real reason they need my $2 million. They lost the stolen charity money in a series of disastrous real estate investments last year. The annual audit is next week. If they do not deposit at least half of the missing funds by tomorrow morning, the auditors will flag the account, and the entire church will know that the golden boy and his perfect wife stole $4 million from their own congregation. Marcus lunged forward, slamming his hands onto the table. "Shut up!" he screamed, his voice breaking with pure desperation. "Shut your mouth right now, Kendra!" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. Panic had finally set into his eyes. The predator had just realized he was actually the prey. "You put me in handcuffs, Marcus," I whispered softly. "But you are the one who is never going home." Marcus stared at me with wild, unblinking eyes. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his thick throat. "That is a complete forgery," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the printed receipt on the table. "She faked it. Dad, she works on a computer all day and she just typed up a fake bank document to confuse us and get out of signing the trust transfer. Do not listen to her insane lies." My father did not immediately take Marcus' side. For the first time all evening, the Reverend looked at his golden boy with genuine suspicion. He adjusted his reading glasses and scrutinized the piece of paper in his hands. "The numbers printed here are incredibly specific, Marcus," my father murmured. $4,200,000. That is the exact balance of the church outreach fund as of last month. How would Kendra possibly know the exact balance of a private church account unless this document is completely real? "She hacked into our system," Sarah interjected quickly. Her voice was shrill and desperate. "She is a low-level government clerk, so she probably knows how to hack into basic bank accounts. She is trying to frame us because she hates our success." "Thomas, you cannot possibly believe her over your own son." I leaned back in my leather chair and crossed my arms comfortably. I did not need to say a single word. The trap was already sprung, and the poison of doubt was doing all the heavy lifting for me. My mother stepped closer to my father, peering over his shoulder to look at the document. Eleanor had always been blindly devoted to Marcus, but she was also incredibly protective of the family image. If the church charity fund was empty, the scandal would destroy her social standing forever. "Marcus," my mother said, her voice losing its usual sweet tone. "Why does this paper say the money went to a company called Sterling Holdings? Sterling is Sarah's maiden name. It is just a bizarre coincidence." Marcus stammered, taking another step back from the table. "There are thousands of companies named Sterling. She just picked a name that would make you suspicious. I swear to you, Mom, the money is completely safe. It is invested in a high-yield municipal bond, just like we discussed at the board meeting." "Then log into the account right now," my father demanded. His booming voice suddenly returned, but this time it was directed entirely at his son. "Pull out your phone, Marcus. Open the banking application and show me the balance of the charity fund. Show it to me, and we can put an end to this ridiculous accusation right now." Marcus froze completely. He patted his uniform pockets awkwardly, looking for an excuse. "I cannot do that right now, Dad. The banking application requires a dual authentication token, and I left the security fob at the precinct. You know how strict the bank is with high balance accounts." "That is a blatant lie," my father roared, his face turning purple again. "You showed me the balance on your phone just last week during Sunday dinner. You did not need any security fob then. Open the application, Marcus." Sarah stepped between Marcus and my father, holding her hands up defensively. "Thomas, please lower your voice," she pleaded. "You are letting Kendra manipulate you. We need to focus on getting her to sign the trust transfer so Marcus can fund his political campaign." My father shoved Sarah's hands away with surprising force. "Do not change the subject, Sarah," he snapped. "If the church money is gone, there will not be any political campaign. There will be a criminal investigation that will destroy my church." He turned back to Marcus, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of anger and heartbreak. "For years I have defended you, Marcus. I covered up your gambling debts in college. But if you stole money from my congregation, I will personally hand you over to the authorities. The united front against me was officially broken. The family alliance had fractured into a million sharp pieces." Marcus looked at his father with pure hatred. "You would actually turn me in?" He sneered, his upper lip curling into an ugly snarl. "After everything I have done to make this family look good. You are a pathetic old man." My mother gasped loudly, covering her mouth with both of her hands. "Marcus, how dare you speak to your father that way?" she cried. Sarah grabbed Marcus by the arm. "We are leaving right now," she yelled. "You are not going anywhere," my father bellowed, stepping directly in front of the heavy oak doors to block their exit. "You are going to stay right here?" "You are not going anywhere," my father bellowed, stepping directly in front of the heavy oak doors to block their exit. "You are going to stay right here." He stood with his arms crossed, his broad shoulders covering the only way out of the VIP suite. The booming voice of the Reverend had returned, but this time it was not directed at me. It was aimed like a loaded weapon directly at his golden boy. "You are going to look me in the eye, Marcus, and you are going to tell me exactly where that charity money went." My father demanded, his chest heaving with every breath. Marcus looked at the heavy oak doors and then back at our father. His polished facade was shattered, leaving only a terrified and cornered little boy in a police uniform. He opened his mouth, but he was shaking so badly that his teeth clicked together. "Dad, I can explain everything," Marcus stammered, holding his hands up in a desperate plea. "The real estate market took an unexpected dive. We were just trying to grow the fund. We wanted to double the charity money so we could build that new youth center you talked about. We only borrowed it temporarily." My father closed his eyes and let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. "You borrowed $4 million and lost it in offshore shell companies," he whispered, the reality finally breaking his spirit. "You stole from the community. You stole from God, Marcus." But Sarah was not ready to surrender. The realization that her wealthy lifestyle was evaporating right in front of her eyes caused something inside her brain to snap. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream that sounded out of place coming from a woman wearing designer silk. She dropped her expensive clutch onto the floor and spun around to face me. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now wild and disheveled. Her eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with a feral, manic desperation. "This is all your fault, you selfish witch!" Sarah shrieked, marching back to the mahogany table. She picked up the heavy gold pen and slammed it down onto the trust transfer document so hard that the tip tore right through the thick paper. She leaned over the table and grabbed my right hand. Her fingernails dug painfully into my skin as she tried to force my fingers to wrap around the gold pen. "Sign it," she screamed, spit flying from her lips and landing on my cheek. "Sign the paper right now. If you sign it, we can put the money back before the audit. Thomas will not have to know anything. The church will be completely safe. You have to sign it, Kendra. You owe us your worthless life." I did not fight her immediately. I let her struggle against my dead weight, watching her face turn a deep shade of purple from the physical exertion. Sarah was used to lifting nothing heavier than a champagne glass. Her manic strength was no match for my physical training, but her desperation was highly entertaining to observe. "Is this how the elegant First Lady of the police precinct behaves, Sarah?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold mockery. I kept my right arm completely rigid, refusing to let her move my hand closer to the torn paper. "What would your country club friends think if they saw you acting like a rabid animal over a stolen charity fund? I wonder if they serve avocado toast in federal prison. Because with your level of involvement, you are looking at least 15 years for wire fraud and conspiracy." "Shut up!" Sarah howled, her voice cracking violently. She planted her feet and pulled my arm, but I did not budge. "Marcus, help me!" she cried out, looking over her shoulder at her husband. "Make her sign it, Marcus. Break her wrist if you have to. Just make her sign the paper." Marcus took a hesitant step forward, but he looked at my father, blocking the door. Then he looked at me. He was completely paralyzed by fear and indecision. "Listen to your brilliant wife, Marcus," I goaded him, flashing a predatory smile. "Come over here and break a federal agent's wrist. Add aggravated assault of a government official to your growing list of felony charges. Let us see how many consecutive life sentences you can rack up before midnight." My mother, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly snapped to life. She rushed forward and grabbed Sarah's shoulders, trying to pull the manic woman away from me. Sarah let go of her. Eleanor pleaded, her voice trembling with horror. "Let her go right now." But Sarah swung her arm wildly, backhanding my mother across the face. My mother stumbled backward, falling heavily against the leather sofa with a loud gasp. My father let out a furious roar when he saw his wife fall. He lunged forward, grabbing Sarah by the arms and shoving her away from the table. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he shouted, his face flushed with a terrifying rage. "You do not ever raise your hand to my wife." Sarah staggered backward, her chest heaving as she glared at my parents with absolute contempt. "She is defending a useless brat," Sarah spat back. "We are trying to save your entire legacy, and you are worried about a little slap." Marcus stood frozen between his father and his wife, completely paralyzed by the exploding violence. His perfect family was tearing itself apart right in front of his eyes. I watched the chaos unfold with cold detachment. They were eating each other alive. It was the perfect moment to drop the final bait. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the shouting like a sharp blade. The room instantly fell completely silent. They all turned to look at me, panting and sweating under the harsh lights. I let out a long, heavy sigh, allowing my shoulders to slump in an exaggerated display of defeat. I looked at the torn trust document and then up at Marcus. "You win," I said softly, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound broken. "I will sign the transfer. I will give you the $2 million to cover up your embezzlement and fund your campaign." Sarah let out a breathless gasp of triumph. Her manic eyes lit up with greedy delight. She immediately lunged toward the table to fix the torn paper, but Marcus put his hand up to stop her. He narrowed his eyes at me suspiciously. "Why the sudden change of heart, Kendra?" he asked, his voice laced with heavy doubt. "A minute ago you were threatening me with federal prison." "Because I just watched your wife strike our mother and you did absolutely nothing to stop her," I replied, keeping my tone flat and defeated. "I realized that you two are desperate enough to actually hurt someone to get this money. I am not going to let you destroy this family physically just because you already destroyed it financially. I just want this nightmare to end. I want you to take the money and leave me alone forever." My father helped my mother up from the sofa. Eleanor was quietly sobbing, holding her red cheek. "Thomas, she wants to sign it." My mother whispered, her voice shaking. "Let her sign it so we can fix the church fund and go home." I picked up the heavy gold pen and held it over the signature line. "But I have one single condition," I announced firmly. I looked directly into Marcus' eyes. "If I am going to sign over my entire future, I need a guarantee that you are not going to throw me in jail anyway. I need someone with actual authority in this city to witness this agreement and guarantee my safety." Marcus scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "Who exactly do you want to witness this, Kendra?" "I am the police captain. I am the highest authority you are going to get tonight." "Not quite," I countered. "I want you to call Captain Miller." The mention of his precinct commander made Marcus blink in surprise. "Captain Miller," he repeated, looking thoroughly confused. "Why would I call my commanding officer to a family dispute?" "Because Captain Miller is the only person who can formally guarantee that the fake federal impersonation charges against me disappear," I explained smoothly, weaving the trap tighter. "He is your boss. He has the power to squash any police report you file tonight. Call him Marcus. Tell him you caught your sister with a fake badge, but you want to handle it internally as a family matter. Have him come to this room right now. When he walks through those doors and gives me his word that I am legally safe, I will sign the trust over to you." Sarah rolled her eyes aggressively. "This is ridiculous, Marcus," she groaned. "Just make her sign it now. We do not need Miller involved in our finances." But Marcus held his hand up, a slow, arrogant smile spreading across his face. He thought he finally understood my angle. He thought I was terrified of going to jail. "It is actually a brilliant idea, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Miller owes me a favor anyway. He is a practical man. If he oversees this little confession, he becomes an accessory to our family secret. It guarantees he will fast-track my promotion to chief next month because he will know we have the money to back it up." My father stepped forward, looking incredibly nervous about bringing an outsider into their criminal conspiracy. "Marcus, Are you sure this is a wise decision? My father asked, wringing his hands together. Captain Miller is a powerful man. What if he asks too many questions about the charity fund? Dad, you really do not understand how this city operates, do you? Marcus mocked, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. Miller is just as corrupt as the rest of the union bosses. He loves money and power. When he sees our political machine, he will gladly look the other way regarding the church funds. Call him Marcus, I repeated, holding the pen steady. The trap was perfectly set. Captain Miller was the exact target my federal task force had been investigating for 6 months. By inviting Miller into this room, Marcus was delivering the final piece of the criminal puzzle directly into my hands. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he tried to find the hidden catch in my proposal. He could not see one. In his arrogant mind, he was the smartest person in the room. He reached into his perfectly pressed uniform pocket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. "You really want me to call the captain?" he asked, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You understand that once Miller is involved, there is absolutely no backing out. If you try to pull any stunts with the signature, he will personally see to it that you are charged with federal impersonation to the maximum extent of the law." I simply nodded and gestured toward his phone. "Make the call, Marcus. I am not backing out." Sarah leaned against the mahogany table, a cruel smirk returning to her lips. She crossed her arms and looked down at me with pure disdain. "You are finally doing something useful with your life, Kendra," she sneered. "You should be thanking us for allowing you to contribute to a legacy that actually matters instead of wasting away in obscurity." Marcus unlocked his phone and scrolled to his favorites list. He tapped Miller's name and pressed the speaker icon, setting the phone down in the middle of the table so everyone could hear. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered the call. "Yeah, Marcus, what is it?" Miller barked, his voice thick with the exhaustion of a man who spent his life managing dirty secrets. "I told you not to bother me unless it was an absolute emergency. I am at the country club dinner right now." Marcus cleared his throat, puffing his chest out even though his boss was not in the room to see it. "Sorry to interrupt your evening, Captain, but we have a slightly sensitive situation here at the Grand Plaza Hotel. It is a family matter, but it requires a bit of your official discretion. And it directly involves the campaign funding we discussed earlier this week." The tone on the other end of the line immediately shifted from annoyed to highly interested. "I am listening," Marcus Miller said, his voice dropping lower. "What kind of situation are we dealing with exactly?" Marcus shot me a triumphant glare. "Well, it turns out my little sister Kendra showed up to my parents' anniversary party carrying a fake federal badge. She was pretending to be an FBI agent to impress people. I currently have her detained in a private room. Now, obviously, I could haul her down to the precinct and book her for impersonation. But seeing as it is a family event, I want to keep this quiet. She has agreed to completely fund my campaign with a massive trust transfer tonight as an apology for the embarrassment. But she is being paranoid. She wants you here in person to guarantee she will not be prosecuted after she signs the money over to my political action committee." There was a brief pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of clinking glasses in the background of Miller's call. "You caught her impersonating a federal agent," Miller repeated, a dark chuckle rumbling through the phone speaker. "That is a serious offense, Marcus. But if she is willing to make a generous contribution to the future of this department, I suppose we can practice some community policing and handle this internally. How much money are we talking about here?" $2 million, Marcus replied, a wide, greedy grin spreading across his face. "It covers the union endorsements the media buys, and a little extra for your discretionary fund, Captain. Just as a thank you for your continued guidance and support." My father shifted uncomfortably on his feet, clearly disturbed by the blatant bribery happening right in front of him. But he kept his mouth tightly shut, choosing his son's corrupt success over his own moral preaching. My mother simply looked away, unable to face the reality of what her son had become. "I will be there in 10 minutes, Miller said, his voice filled with greedy anticipation. "Keep her in that room, Marcus. Do not let her talk to anyone else. We will get this sorted out and get your campaign fully funded tonight." Marcus ended the call and picked up his phone. He looked at me like a conqueror who had just won a massive war. 10 minutes, Kendra, he announced proudly. 10 minutes until you sign your life over to me. He turned to Sarah and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her in for a celebratory embrace. We did it, baby, he whispered loudly for me to hear. We are going to own this city. I watched them celebrate their imaginary victory. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. 10 minutes was exactly the amount of time my tactical team needed to get into position. The digital clock mounted above the heavy oak doors silently ticked forward. 9 minutes and 59 seconds remaining. I leaned back into the plush leather chair and rested my hands comfortably in my lap. The sharp stinging on my cheek from where Sarah had thrown my purse was already fading, replaced by the cold, hard focus of a federal agent closing a massive trap. I closed my eyes for a brief second, taking a slow, deliberate breath. Every single word spoken in this room was currently being transmitted to a black communications van parked 3 levels below us in the underground parking garage. My tactical team was already moving. They were sealing the exits, securing the elevators, and preparing to breach. But inside the soundproof VIP suite, my family was completely oblivious to their impending doom. They thought the waiting period was a victory lap. Marcus loosened his uniform tie and unbuttoned his collar completely, shedding the professional demeanor he had worn for the ballroom crowd. He walked over to the small mahogany wet bar in the corner of the room and poured himself a generous glass of expensive scotch. He held the crystal glass up to the light, admiring the amber liquid, before taking a long, satisfied sip. "We are going to need a new house," Sarah announced, suddenly breaking the tense silence. She paced back and forth across the thick carpet, her designer heels sinking into the plush fabric. "That colonial we bought in the suburbs is fine for a police captain, but it is absolutely not big enough for the chief of police. We need something with an actual gated entrance, Marcus. Somewhere closer to the mayor's exclusive neighborhood. If we are going to be hosting the political elite, we need a dining room that seats at least 20 people, and I refuse to keep driving that old Mercedes. The first lady of the precinct needs a brand new Range Rover." Marcus chuckled, swirling the scotch in his glass. "Whatever you want, baby," he promised, his voice dripping with pure arrogance. $2 million gives us plenty of breathing room. Once the union checks clear and the charity fund is quietly reimbursed, we will have enough left over to upgrade the entire lifestyle. We might even take a trip to Europe to celebrate the swearing-in ceremony next month. Paris sounds absolutely perfect for a chief and his brilliant wife. I watched them mentally spending my inheritance while standing just feet away from me. Their greed was a bottomless pit. They had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic church scandal, and their immediate reaction was not relief or repentance. It was a terrifying hunger for more luxury and status. They had completely detached themselves from reality. My father sat down heavily on the leather sofa, pulling his handkerchief from his pocket to wipe the thick sweat from his bald head. He looked visibly aged. The stress of almost losing his beloved church had drained the vibrant color from his face. Yet he still found a twisted way to justify the absolute evil happening right in front of him. "This is a very heavy burden we are carrying tonight," my father muttered, staring blankly at his polished shoes. "But the Lord works in mysterious ways. He tests our faith, and sometimes he forces us to make incredibly difficult family decisions for the greater good. Your brother is destined for greatness, Kendra. You must understand that this financial transfer is a blessing in disguise. It keeps the church pure and protects the flock from unnecessary scandal." My mother sat beside him, nodding slowly in agreement. "It is the only logical way, Thomas," she whispered, her voice hollow and distant. "Kendra never appreciated the true value of our family name anyway. She was always perfectly content living a thoroughly mediocre life. It is much better that the money goes to someone who can actually use it to build our lasting legacy. We will just tell the church congregation that Kendra decided to make a massive charitable donation to Marcus out of the goodness of her heart. People will think she is so incredibly generous and loyal." The sheer level of cognitive dissonance was staggering. They were actively participating in a kidnapping, extortion, and bribery scheme, and yet they still genuinely believed they were the righteous victims of my selfishness. I did not bother arguing with them anymore. Arguing with them was like trying to teach a brick wall how to read. Instead, I focused all my attention on the digital clock. 2 minutes left. Are you listening, Kendra? Sarah sneered, stopping her pacing to glare at me. When Captain Miller gets here, you better just sign the paper. I smiled. I am looking forward to seeing him, I replied calmly. A sharp series of knocks echoed against the heavy oak doors, cutting through the tense atmosphere in the soundproof room. Marcus immediately straightened his posture and quickly buttoned his uniform collar back up. He ran a hand over his hair, ensuring he looked every bit the perfect police captain. That is him, Marcus announced, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Sarah quickly smoothed down her designer dress and pasted on her most charming country club smile. My parents stood up straight, trying to look respectable for the corrupt police captain who was about to help them steal my inheritance. Marcus walked over to the doors and pulled them open. Captain Miller stepped into the room. He was a large, imposing man in his late 50s with a thick neck and a face reddened by years of heavy drinking and unquestioned authority. He was wearing an expensive tailored tuxedo, clearly interrupted right in the middle of his elite country club dinner. He looked annoyed and impatient, carrying the heavy aura of a man who was used to giving orders and having them instantly obeyed. Captain Marcus greeted him enthusiastically, extending his hand for a firm shake. I sincerely appreciate you coming all the way down here on such short notice. I know how important that dinner was to you. Miller gave a brief, dismissive handshake and stepped further into the room. It is fine, Marcus Miller, grumbled his deep voice, filling the space. But let us make this extremely quick. The mayor is waiting for me at my table, and I do not want to keep him waiting over a petty family dispute. Show me the fake badge, and let us get this financial agreement signed, so I can get back to my evening. Marcus chuckled confidently, leading his boss toward the mahogany table. Of course, Captain. It is right over here. Sarah, pour the captain a glass of that excellent scotch we found. Sarah immediately rushed to the wet bar, eager to play the perfect political hostess for the man who held her husband's future in his hands. Marcus picked up the small black wallet containing my federal badge and held it out toward Miller. As you can see, she went through a lot of trouble to make it look authentic, Marcus said, a smug smile plastered across his face. She is sitting right over there pretending she is not terrified. I told her that you are the commanding officer and that you would personally oversee her signing the trust documents to guarantee her supposed safety. Miller let out a low, condescending laugh and reached out to take the wallet from Marcus. But as Miller turned his head to look in my direction, his hand stopped in midair, his eyes locked onto mine. I was still sitting completely relaxed in the plush leather chair, my hands resting comfortably in my lap. I did not break eye contact. I let him look at my face and process exactly who was sitting in front of him. The transformation in Captain Miller was instantaneous and absolutely spectacular to witness. The arrogant smirk completely vanished from his reddened face. The heavy aura of unquestioned authority evaporated in a fraction of a second. His extended hand began to tremble so violently that he had to pull it back and press it against his side. The color rapidly drained from his thick neck and cheeks, leaving him looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. Marcus did not notice his boss falling apart. He was too busy gloating. She actually tried to tell me that she was leading some kind of massive undercover operation. Marcus laughed, waving his hand dismissively in my direction. Can you believe the absolute delusion of this girl, Captain? She thought she could scare me by dropping some federal jargon. Tell her exactly what happens to people who wave fake federal badges around your city, Captain. Tell her how many years she is going to spend in a state penitentiary if she does not sign the transfer papers right now. But Miller did not say a word. He did not look at the trust transfer documents on the table. He did not look at the scotch Sarah was holding out to him. He was completely paralyzed. His breathing became shallow and rapid. A thick layer of cold sweat broke out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. Captain Marcus asked, his smile faltering, as he finally noticed the absolute terror radiating from his commanding officer. "Are you all right, sir? You look like you're going to be sick. Do you need a glass of water?" Miller ignored Marcus completely. He took a trembling step backward, his eyes wide and unblinking as they remained fixed firmly on my face. He took a trembling step backward, his eyes wide and unblinking as they remained fixed firmly on my face. The heavy crystal glass of expensive scotch that Sarah had just pressed into his hand slipped right through his fingers. It shattered against the thick hotel carpet, sending amber liquid and sharp shards of glass splashing across the polished mahogany floorboards. Nobody moved to clean it up. The sound of the breaking glass seemed to echo forever inside the soundproof room. "Captain, what is wrong with you?" Marcus asked, his voice finally losing its arrogant edge and dropping into a confused whisper. "You just ruined a $50 glass of scotch. Look at the badge, Captain. It is completely fake. Just tell her she is under arrest so we can get this over with." Miller did not look at the badge Marcus was holding out to him. He slowly raised his trembling hand and pointed a thick finger directly at my chest. His mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air on dry land. When he finally managed to force the words past his lips, his voice was nothing more than a hollow, terrified wheeze. Senior Special Agent Miller stammered the words tumbling out of his mouth in a broken, terrified sequence. "Senior Special Agent Kendra Evans, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division." The room plunged into an absolute deathly silence. The air grew so thick and heavy that it was suddenly difficult to breathe. Marcus froze, his hand still outstretched holding the wallet with my badge. He blinked rapidly, staring at his commanding officer as if the older man had just started speaking an alien language. "What did you just say?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking violently. "That is not her title, Captain. Her name is Kendra, but she is just a clerk. She drops data into a computer spreadsheet. She failed out of law school 6 years ago. You are completely confused." Sarah let out a shrill, nervous laugh, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "This is a very bad joke, Captain Miller," she said, her face twitching with rising panic. "Marcus told you on the phone that she bought that badge on the internet. You do not need to play along with her crazy spy fantasy. We just need you to witness the trust transfer so we can fund the campaign." Miller slowly turned his massive head to look at Sarah. The sheer terror in his eyes had quickly morphed into a wild, explosive rage. "You stupid, arrogant fools!" Miller roared, his voice shaking the walls of the VIP suite. He reached out and slapped the leather wallet out of Marcus' hand, sending my federal badge flying across the room. "That is not a prop, you absolute idiot. That is a highly restricted federal identification shield." Miller grabbed Marcus by the collar of his pristine dress uniform, violently yanking the golden boy forward. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Miller screamed, spit flying from his lips and landing on Marcus' terrified face. "Do you know who she is? Who she—" "I was at a joint federal task force briefing in Washington 3 months ago. I saw her picture on a highly classified operational board. She is not a clerk, Marcus. She is the lead federal investigator for the Regional Anti-Corruption Unit. She takes down dirty politicians and corrupt police departments." The color instantly drained from Marcus' face. The healthy bronze flush of his skin turned into a sickly pale gray. His knees visibly buckled under the immense weight of the revelation, and he had to grab the edge of the mahogany table just to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. Sarah stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. My parents stood completely frozen near the sofa, staring at me with expressions of absolute horror and disbelief. "You called me here to a locked room," Miller continued, his voice breaking with sheer panic. "You told me you kidnapped a federal agent and you invited me to help you extort her. You just dragged me into a massive federal conspiracy, Marcus. We are all going to federal prison." I sat forward in my leather chair, placing both of my hands flat on the polished mahogany table. I looked directly at Captain Miller. "It is actually much worse than that, Captain," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady, cutting through their collective panic like a scalpel. "You are not just going to prison for extortion tonight. You are also going to answer for the $4 million that you and Marcus helped launder out of this very church charity fund over the last 3 long years." Captain Miller let out a strangled gasp as the exact figure of the laundered money hit him. His eyes darted wildly around the room looking for hidden cameras or recording devices. He finally realized the terrible truth about the unassuming young woman sitting across from him. He lunged toward the heavy oak doors, his survival instincts taking completely over. He did not care about Marcus or his political campaign anymore. He just wanted to escape the blast radius of this massive federal investigation. I did not move a single muscle to stop him. I simply reached up with my freed right hand and pressed 2 fingers firmly against the hidden microphone, taped securely beneath the collar of my dress. "Operation Jericho is an absolute go," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the tense silence of the room. "Breach and secure all targets immediately." The response was instantaneous and absolutely deafening. Before Captain Miller could even reach the brass handle, the heavy oak double doors with their thick frosted glass panels exploded inward. A specialized tactical battering ram completely obliterated the locking mechanism in a single strike. The decorative glass panels shattered into thousands of tiny, sharp fragments that rained down across the plush hotel carpet. Heavy boots pounded against the floor as men and women in dark green tactical gear poured into the soundproof VIP suite like an unstoppable tidal wave. The blinding beams of white tactical flashlights pierced the dimly lit room, cutting through the shadows. Bright red laser sights danced across the chests of the corrupt police captain and my brother. Federal agents carrying compact assault rifles moved with flawless military precision, instantly fanning out to secure every single corner of the suite. "Federal agents, get down on the ground right now!" A massive tactical team leader roared, his voice booming over the sudden chaos. "Show me your hands and get down on the floor now!" Captain Miller froze, his hands shooting straight up toward the ceiling. He was a seasoned cop, and he knew exactly how this drill worked. He dropped heavily to his knees, interlacing his thick fingers tightly behind his head. He lowered his face to the carpet, completely surrendering to the overwhelming force without putting up any fight. Marcus, however, was entirely too stunned to process the violent intrusion. He stood frozen next to the mahogany table, his mouth hanging wide open in complete shock. He stared at the heavily armed agents as if he was trapped in a bizarre hallucination. He was supposed to be the untouchable golden boy. He was supposed to be the next chief of police in this city. This terrifying reality simply did not compute in his arrogant brain. 2 tactical agents rushed forward, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. They grabbed Marcus by the shoulders of his pristine dress uniform and forced him aggressively face down onto the thick carpet. Marcus let out a muffled cry of shock as his cheek hit the floor hard. The sound of heavy plastic zip ties ratcheting tightly closed around his wrists quickly replaced the metallic click of his own police handcuffs from earlier in the evening. Sarah let out a piercing, terrified scream. She dropped to her knees, covering her face with both of her hands, and began sobbing hysterically. Her designer silk dress pooled awkwardly around her on the floor, completely ruined by the scattered shards of broken glass and the spilled scotch. My mother and father scrambled backward, pressing their backs flat against the far wall of the suite. My father raised his trembling hands high in the air, his eyes wide with absolute horror, as he watched his beloved son get treated exactly like a violent street criminal. A tall federal agent named Thorne stepped out from the tactical formation and walked directly toward the mahogany table. He completely ignored the corrupt officers whining on the floor and focused his entire attention on me. The room was secure, and all hostile targets were effectively neutralized. "Are you injured?" Special Agent Evans Thorne asked, his tone completely professional and loud enough for my stunned family to hear clearly over the crying. I held up my left arm, which was still locked in the police-issue cuff attached to the heavy armrest of my leather chair. "Just my pride, Thorn," I replied smoothly, offering him a small, appreciative smile. "Could you please retrieve the key from the captain on the floor?" Thorn nodded and reached down roughly, searching Marcus' pockets. He pulled the small silver key free and walked over to unlock my remaining restraint. The heavy steel cuff fell away from my wrist with a satisfying clatter. I slowly rubbed my skin, feeling the warm blood flow freely back into my hand. I stood up slowly, towering over the pathetic sight of my brother pinned to the floor. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the federal authority in charge of a massive criminal raid, and their entire corrupt world had just spectacularly collapsed around them. I rubbed my wrists one final time and walked slowly around the heavy mahogany table. My high heels clicked softly against the polished floorboards, completely cutting through the pathetic sounds of Sarah sobbing and Marcus struggling against his plastic zip ties. I stopped right in front of Captain Miller, who was still kneeling with his fingers laced tightly behind his massive head. His eyes darted nervously up to meet mine, filled with the desperate panic of a trapped animal. "You really thought you could run a sophisticated money laundering syndicate out of a local police precinct, Captain?" I asked, my voice echoing with cold precision. "Did you honestly believe the federal government would just ignore millions of dollars systematically disappearing from municipal pension funds and local charity accounts?" Miller swallowed hard, his chest heaving under his expensive tailored tuxedo. "We were incredibly careful," he whispered, his voice trembling with the realization of his absolute ruin. "We used decentralized shell companies. We routed everything through encrypted international servers. There was absolutely no digital footprint linking the offshore accounts back to the precinct or the political campaigns. There is always a footprint." "Captain," I corrected him, gesturing toward the thick stack of transfer documents Sarah had so eagerly provided earlier. "You just got extremely sloppy because you let arrogant amateurs like my brother handle your local physical transactions. I have been tracking your underground financial network for exactly 6 months. It has been exhausting sitting at my desk pretending to be a low-level data clerk while actively building a racketeering case against my own flesh and blood." My task force noticed the initial banking irregularities when Marcus started making massive undocumented cash deposits to secure his early union endorsements. He thought he was being incredibly clever by keeping the deposits just under the federal reporting limit. But when a police captain does that 50 times in a single month, it triggers a massive automated red flag at the Treasury Department. Marcus twisted his head awkwardly on the thick carpet, desperately trying to look up at me. His face was stained with tears, sweat, and a small smudge of dirt from the floor. "Kendra, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You absolutely cannot do this to me. I am your older brother. We grew up together. We share the exact same blood. Tell these heavily armed agents it was just a massive family misunderstanding. Tell them I was working deep undercover for you to expose Miller. I will testify against him, Kendra. Just tell them to take these plastic ties off my wrists." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but profound disgust for the man he had become. "You do not get to play the loyal family card now, Marcus," I said, my tone completely devoid of any sisterly sympathy. 10 minutes ago, you were fully prepared to lock me in a cage and destroy my entire life, just to fund your pathetic political ego. You were perfectly willing to let Mom and Dad disown me and leave me to rot in a state penitentiary over a fake badge charge. You are not a police officer, and you are certainly not my brother. You are just a common greedy thief wearing a stolen uniform." My father pushed himself away from the wall, his hands shaking violently as he took a tentative step forward. "Kendra," he started, his voice breaking into a hollow, painful rasp. "How long have you actually known about the stolen church money? How long did you sit at our Sunday dinner table, listening to me praise him, knowing your brother was stealing directly from my congregation?" I turned to face my father. "I found the final piece of the financial puzzle 2 weeks ago. Dad," I explained, keeping my posture rigid. I traced the missing church outreach funds directly to a Cayman Islands account, registered under Sarah's maiden name. But I needed absolute, undeniable proof that Marcus was acting under the direct orders of Captain Miller. I needed them in the exact same room, discussing the stolen money on a recorded federal wire. I needed a clear confession of extortion to seal the conspiracy charges. And thanks to your incredible anniversary party and Marcus' uncontrollable arrogance, they practically handed me the entire conviction on a silver platter. Sarah stopped crying long enough to glare up at me with vicious, bloodshot eyes. "You ruined absolutely everything," she screamed, her voice raw and grating like broken glass. "We were going to be the most powerful and respected family in this entire city. You are just a jealous, bitter little girl who wanted to destroy us because you could never be as perfect or as popular as Marcus." I crouched down slightly so I was at eye level with my furious sister-in-law. "Perfection is a dangerous illusion, Sarah," I whispered softly. "And power bought with stolen charity money is just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. You wanted to be the wealthy first lady of the police precinct so badly that you willingly committed federal wire fraud. I sincerely hope you enjoy wearing standard-issue designer jumpsuits in federal prison, because that is the only luxury brand you will be seeing for the next 20 years. Thorne stepped up beside me holding a thick digital tactical tablet. "Senior Special Agent Evans," he said, maintaining his strict professional military demeanor. "The heavy transport vehicles are secured in the underground garage. We have additional strike teams simultaneously raiding Captain Miller's house and the main precinct headquarters as we speak. We are fully ready to move the prisoners whenever you give the final order." I looked at Agent Thorne and nodded slowly. "Not yet, Thorne," I replied, keeping my voice steady and commanding. "Before we load them into the transport vehicles and parade them in front of the entire anniversary gala outside, I want to make sure my parents understand exactly who they have been blindly protecting all these years." I turned my back on my sobbing brother. I walked over to the mahogany table and reached into the hidden compartment of my own briefcase. I pulled out a thick blue binder stamped with the official seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was the master audit file for the Church Charity Foundation. I opened the heavy binder and let the pages fall open to the clearly highlighted sections. Sarah had stopped her hysterical crying and was now staring at the blue folder with wide, terrified eyes. She knew exactly what was inside. "You called me a jealous, bitter little girl, Sarah," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the room. "You claimed you were building a powerful legacy of Black excellence. Let us take a very close look at exactly how you built that legacy." I flipped to the first tab and began reading the financial records aloud. On October 12th of last year, a wire transfer of $450,000 was authorized from the Church Community Rebuilding Grant. The official ledger claims this money was used to purchase building supplies for the new youth center. However, the routing numbers indicate the funds were transferred directly to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. A week later, that exact amount was used to purchase a luxury summer cabin in Aspen, Colorado. The deed for that cabin is registered exclusively in your name, Sarah. My father let out a choked gasp. "Aspen," he whispered, leaning heavily against the wall for support. "You told me you rented that cabin for a women ministry retreat." I turned to the next page, ignoring his interruption. "It gets much worse, Dad," I continued. "On February 18th, a sum of $230,000 was withdrawn from the Orphan Relief Fund. According to the federal bank statements, that money was wired directly to Sarah's private interior design firm under the guise of consulting fees. But Sarah never provided any consulting services to the church. Instead, she used that stolen orphan money to purchase the vintage Mercedes she was just complaining about driving." Sarah shook her head violently, her wet hair whipping across her face. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are twisting the facts. Marcus told me that money was a legitimate bonus for all the unpaid charity work I do for the congregation. I did not know it came from the orphan fund. He told me it was clean money." I flipped to the third tab and pulled out a high-resolution photocopy of a bank authorization form. I dropped it onto the table right next to the ruined trust transfer document. I am not twisting anything, Sarah, I said coldly. That is a bank authorization form for the February transfer. And right there on the bottom line is your undeniable signature. You did not just spend the money, you actively moved it. You are a primary co-conspirator in a massive federal wire fraud scheme. My mother covered her face with her hands, letting out a long, agonizing wail. She finally saw the ugly truth she had actively ignored for years. Her perfect daughter-in-law was a common thief. Her golden boy son was a corrupt monster who stole from the most vulnerable members of their own community. I looked down at Marcus, who was still pinned to the floor by the tactical agents. And then there is the political campaign account. I continued flipping to the final section of the blue binder. Over the past 3 months, Marcus authorized 18 separate wire transfers, totaling $1.2 million. He drained the church pension fund to bribe local union bosses and purchase illegal endorsements for his police chief campaign. He used the hard-earned retirement money of elderly church members to buy himself a shiny new badge. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, refusing to look at me or our parents. He had absolutely no defense left. His entire life was built on a fragile house of cards, and I had just set the whole thing completely on fire. You both used this family and this church as your own personal piggy bank, I said, closing the heavy blue binder with a loud, echoing thud. You stole millions of dollars from people who trusted you implicitly. And when you finally ran out of church money to steal, you decided to kidnap your own sister and extort her inheritance to cover your tracks. You are not the victims here. You are the absolute worst kind of predators. I turned back to Agent Thorne, who was standing patiently by the shattered glass doors. The tactical team was ready. The evidence was presented. The truth was finally completely out in the open. My father stumbled forward, his knees finally giving out beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, sending the ruined trust document fluttering to the floor. The reality of the blue binder had completely shattered his carefully constructed world. He looked toward the heavy oak doors where the shattered glass lay scattered. Beyond those doors, 200 of his most loyal church members were still drinking champagne and celebrating his 40 years of impeccable religious service. They were waiting for their beloved reverend and his golden boy son to return. Kendra, you cannot let them walk Marcus out there. My father pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, but stopped short of actually touching my dress. If the tactical team marches him through that ballroom in handcuffs, my entire congregation will see it. The local news crews are already parked outside covering the anniversary gala. Our family name will be completely annihilated before midnight. Please, Kendra, you have all the evidence. You have the blue binder. Let the church elders handle this internally. I will force Marcus to resign from the precinct, and we will quietly sell the Aspen cabin to pay back every single stolen dime. Just call off the federal agents and stop ruining this family. My mother rushed to his side, nodding frantically. The tears streaming down her face were no longer theatrical. They were born of pure, unadulterated terror at the prospect of losing her precious social standing. She is right, Kendra, my mother cried, wringing her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Think about the legacy we have built in this city. Think about the community. If people find out that the police captain and the reverend son stole millions from the orphan fund, it will completely break their faith. People will laugh at us. We will be absolutely shunned. You cannot destroy your own blood just to prove a point. You have the power to stop this right now. Tell this tactical team to leave through the back service elevator. I stared at the two people who were supposed to love and protect me unconditionally. Even now, after witnessing the undeniable proof of massive federal felonies, their only concern was their public image. They did not care that Marcus had actively stolen from vulnerable orphans. They did not care that Sarah had bought a luxury car with stolen community donations. And they certainly did not care that they had just spent the last hour actively helping their son try to extort and kidnap me. I am not ruining this family, Mom, I replied, my voice completely calm and devoid of any lingering affection. Marcus and Sarah ruined this family the moment they decided their extravagant lifestyle was more important than basic human decency. And you both helped them do it. You created this monstrous ego inside Marcus by treating him like a flawless god and treating me like an embarrassing failure. You covered up his gambling addictions in college. You ignored the glaring red flags when he started living vastly beyond his police salary. You happily turned a blind eye to his obvious corruption because he looked so handsome in his dress uniform, and he made you look so successful at your fancy church dinners. My father shook his head, tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. We did not know about the stolen money, Kendra, he sobbed, his broad shoulders shaking with heavy grief. I swear to you, we did not know he was taking from the church. But you knew he was trying to steal from me, Dad. I shot back, taking a step closer to him. You knew exactly what he was doing in this room tonight. You physically blocked the door so I could not escape. You demanded that I sign away my entire inheritance to cover his massive debts. You threatened to publicly disown me and destroy my reputation if I did not submit to his extortion. You were perfectly willing to sacrifice my entire future just to maintain the pathetic illusion of your perfect family. So do not stand there and pretend you are an innocent victim of his deception. I turned my gaze away from my weeping parents and looked directly at Agent Thorne. The time for talking is over, I announced. Agent Thorne, please coordinate with the perimeter units. You are clear to transport the prisoners to the federal holding facility. My mother let out a loud, agonizing scream as two tactical agents hauled Marcus up from the carpet by his arms. He was completely limp, his face buried in his chest. Agent Thorne grabbed Sarah by her arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. The absolute panic in the room reached a fever pitch. Sarah realized the massive gravity of the 20-year federal prison sentence I had just laid out before her. The polished facade of the fiercely loyal political wife vanished, completely replaced in an instant by the vicious survival instinct of a cornered rat. She violently wrenched her arm out of Agent Thorne's firm grasp and stumbled awkwardly toward the center of the destroyed room. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at Marcus, who was currently struggling to sit up on his knees. "It was all him!" Sarah shrieked, her shrill voice bouncing wildly off the soundproof walls. "I did not do anything wrong here. He forced me to sign those international bank authorization forms. I am just a stay-at-home mother and a supportive wife. I do not know anything about offshore accounts or illegal wire transfers." Marcus stopped struggling against the thick plastic zip ties and stared up at his wife in absolute stunned disbelief. The sudden vicious betrayal seemed to hit him much harder than the physical force of the tactical raid. "What are you saying?" Marcus gasped, his handsome face twisting into an ugly mask of pure agony. "Sarah, please do not do this to me. We are supposed to be an unstoppable team. We are supposed to fight this disaster together. Fight this together!" Sarah spat, stepping closer to him and looking down with utter revulsion. "There is absolutely no fighting a massive federal audit, Marcus. You specifically told me the money was perfectly clean. You explicitly told me it was a highly legitimate campaign bonus from the police union executives. You completely lied to me. You heavily manipulated me into putting my maiden name on those shell companies just to protect your own pathetic career. I am a victim of his extreme psychological abuse," she yelled, turning wildly to face Agent Thorne and the other tactical officers. "You have to write that down in your official government report. He maliciously used my incredibly trusting nature to launder his dirty money." Marcus' face turned a violent shade of dark crimson. The flawless golden boy who had always been protected, coddled, and worshipped by everyone around him suddenly found himself thrown directly under the bus by the woman he desperately loved. "You lying, venomous snake," Marcus roared, struggling furiously against the thick plastic restraints aggressively cutting deep into his wrists. "You knew exactly where every single stolen dime came from. You were the one who obsessively researched the Cayman Islands' corporate tax loopholes. You were the one who continuously demanded the Aspen cabin and the imported luxury cars. I just wanted to fund the political campaign, but you selfishly wanted to live exactly like a careless billionaire." I stood silently beside the heavy mahogany table and watched their beautiful implosion with absolute professional satisfaction. They were predictably doing exactly what arrogant cowards always do when eventually faced with actual devastating consequences. They were brutally tearing each other to bloody pieces. "He is a manipulative, pathological liar," Sarah screamed back at him, her flushed face completely unhinged and covered in ruined makeup. She turned sharply toward my horrified parents, desperately seeking a familiar, gullible ally. "Thomas Eleanor. Please tell them," she pleaded, her eyes wide and intensely frantic. "Tell these federal agents that Marcus is clinically obsessed with obtaining power. He is the violent one who aggressively wanted to violently steal Kendra's rightful inheritance. I told him repeatedly it was a terrible idea, but he viciously threatened to divorce me and take my children away if I did not help him set up the trust transfer tonight. I only threw Kendra's purse because I was absolutely terrified of what Marcus would physically do to me later if I miserably failed him." My mother slowly backed away from Sarah as if the younger woman was suddenly covered in a highly contagious, deadly disease. "Do not you ever dare speak to me," my mother hissed, her fragile voice trembling with absolute sickening revulsion. "You are nothing but a greedy, manipulative, heartless monster. You completely infected my wonderful son with your endless selfish demands for unearned luxury. Do not blame her for my desperate choices," Mom, Marcus shouted, his voice breaking into a pathetic, weak sob. "I did it because nothing was ever enough for either of you. You constantly wanted the perfect wealthy police captain. She always wanted the famous powerful politician. I had to illegally steal just to blindly keep up the impossible, arrogant image you all continuously demanded of me." "Shut up, both of you!" Captain Miller suddenly barked from his humiliating position flat on the floor. His face was buried in the carpet, but his voice still strangely held a tiny trace of police command. "Shut up, both of you," Captain Miller suddenly barked from his humiliating position flat on the floor. His face was buried in the carpet, but his voice still strangely held a tiny trace of police command. "You are giving them a recorded confession, you absolute morons," Miller groaned, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of the tactical agent holding him down. Agent Thorne ignored the pathetic infighting and gave a sharp hand signal to his squad. "Let us move them out," Thorne commanded, his deep voice, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "The perimeter is secure and the transport vehicles are waiting." Two heavily armored federal agents grabbed Marcus by his upper arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. He staggered wildly, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand upright. Sarah was pulled up next her designer silk dress, completely torn and stained with spilled scotch. Captain Miller was dragged up last, looking like a defeated, broken warlord. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, the shards of shattered glass crunching loudly beneath my practical heels. Agent Thorne kicked the remaining wooden fragments of the doors open wide. The sudden transition from the tense soundproof suite to the massive hotel ballroom was jarring. Outside, the live jazz band was still playing a lively, upbeat tune. 200 guests were cheerfully drinking champagne, eating expensive catered appetizers, and waiting for the golden boy to return. They fully expected to see Marcus emerge victorious, having successfully disciplined his unruly criminal sister. Instead, the heavy doors swung open to reveal an absolute nightmare. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing mid-note. The joyful chatter of the anniversary gala died instantly, replaced by a thick, heavy silence that blanketed the entire room. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the VIP suite. Waitresses froze in place holding silver trays of food. Wealthy politicians stopped shaking hands. The elite members of our church congregation stared in absolute shock. Marcus was marched out first. The pristine police captain uniform he wore so proudly was now heavily wrinkled and covered in dust from the carpet. His hands were bound tightly behind his back with thick black plastic zip ties. He kept his head down, staring at the polished marble floor, desperately trying to hide his tear-stained face from the people who had worshipped him just an hour ago. He was no longer the brave protector of the city. He was a disgraced criminal being paraded before his own community. Sarah followed right behind him, She did not have the physical strength to hide her face. She sobbed openly, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks in thick black rivers. She stumbled awkwardly in her high heels, looking completely unhinged. The wealthy white woman who loved to lecture the congregation about community values was now being escorted out by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for aggressively stealing charity money. Deacon Hayes dropped his expensive wineglass. It shattered against the marble floor, but nobody even looked down at the mess. Sister Beatrice pressed her hands against her chest, her mouth hanging wide open in pure disbelief. These were the exact same people who had loudly cheered when Marcus put me in heavy steel handcuffs. They had readily accepted the lie that I was a worthless criminal. Now they were watching their beloved hero fall from grace in the most spectacular and public way possible. Captain Miller was marched out next. His expensive tuxedo ruined his face bright red with intense shame. Several local politicians in the crowd immediately turned their backs, pretending they did not know the corrupt police chief candidate. The strict social hierarchy of the room was entirely collapsing right before my eyes. My parents walked out last. They were not wearing plastic handcuffs, but they looked just as defeated as the prisoners ahead of them. My father, the Great Reverend, walked with his broad shoulders slumped and his bald head bowed incredibly low. The booming confidence that usually filled the church was completely gone forever. My mother walked beside him, clutching his arm, looking like she had rapidly aged 20 years in a single night. They walked past their loyal congregation, completely unable to look anyone in the eye. Their cherished legacy of black excellence was officially dead, replaced by a dark legacy of greed. I stepped out of the VIP suite, right behind my broken parents. I was no longer wearing the humiliating metal handcuffs. I stood extremely tall, my posture straight, and my expression completely calm. I walked past table 4, where my sparkling water glass was still sitting exactly where I left it. The whispers finally began to ripple through the massive ballroom. They were not whispering about my fake badge or my failed career anymore. "Did you see the federal agents on his jacket?" a woman whispered loudly. "They are arresting Marcus. What on earth did he possibly do?" "I heard they stole money from the church fund," another voice muttered from the back of the room. "I knew they were living way beyond their means. You cannot buy a massive house like theirs on a basic police salary." I walked toward the main exit of the ballroom, ignoring the stares and the rapid gossip. The tactical agents formed a tight, protective perimeter around Marcus, Sarah, and Miller, guiding them steadily toward the main hotel lobby. I watched Marcus physically shrink into himself as a local news camera crew waiting outside the ballroom doors suddenly aimed their bright white spotlights directly at him. The reporters who were supposed to cover a beautiful church anniversary celebration were now broadcasting the massive arrest of a corrupt police captain on live television. The golden boy had finally fallen, and the entire world was watching. I stood in the grand foyer of the hotel, watching the flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles paint the walls through the massive glass doors. The media cameras continued to flash blindingly as Marcus and Sarah were shoved violently into the back of heavily armored vans. The sirens began to wail, signaling the absolute end of their corrupt reign over this city. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air filtering in through the sliding doors, feeling a profound sense of physical lightness that I had not experienced in years. The heavy, suffocating cloak of my family expectations had finally been lifted off my shoulders. "Kendra," a fragile, trembling voice whispered from directly behind me. I turned around slowly. My mother and father were standing near the edge of the sprawling lobby, completely isolated from the rest of their horrified congregation. The wealthy church elders who usually surrounded them like a loyal royal court had completely scattered, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the rapidly unfolding federal scandal. My parents looked incredibly small and utterly defeated. Stripped of their arrogant pride and their beloved golden child, they were just two terrified elderly people realizing they had bet their entire lives on a spectacularly losing hand. My father took a hesitant, awkward step forward, holding his empty hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. Kendra, please, he begged, his booming preacher voice reduced to a trembling mixture of shock and profound shame. We are so incredibly sorry. You absolutely have to believe us. We were completely blinded by his sudden success and his shiny uniform. We never ever wanted you to get physically hurt in that room tonight. You are our daughter. Our beautiful, brilliant, successful daughter. We can heal from this terrible public tragedy as a family. We just need to stick together now more than ever before. My mother nodded enthusiastically, wiping her ruined, tear-streaked face with a crumpled white tissue. We will make it right, she cried, stepping closer but clearly still terrified to touch my clothes. We will publicly apologize to you, Kendra, in front of the entire congregation. We will tell the entire church how incredibly successful you are at the Federal Bureau. We are so deeply proud of you. We always knew you were destined for truly great things. Please do not abandon your elderly parents in our absolute darkest hour. I looked at them, feeling a cold, hollow emptiness, where my childhood desperation for their parental approval used to live. I studied their desperate, pleading eyes. They were not apologizing for treating me like garbage for 33 long years. They were apologizing because they had confidently backed the wrong horse, and now they desperately needed a new champion to magically salvage their destroyed social standing. They wanted to use my prestigious federal badge to desperately buy back the community respect that Marcus had just squandered. You are not sorry, Mom, I said, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any lingering anger or sadness. You are just incredibly embarrassed that you got caught. If Marcus had successfully forced me to sign over my legal inheritance in that soundproof room, you would have happily gone back to your expensive champagne and your fancy catered appetizers. You would have let him throw me in the back of a dirty squad car, and you would never have looked back. You are only claiming to be proud of me right now because I am the one holding the keys to the steel handcuffs. My father flinched violently, as if I had physically struck him across his jaw. Kendra, that is an incredibly cruel thing to say, he whispered, clutching his chest. We are your flesh and blood parents. And that is exactly why this situation is so fundamentally tragic. Dad, I replied, my gaze remaining completely steady. You were supposed to be my fiercely protective parents, but you willingly chose to be his criminal accomplices instead. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a thick, folded stack of legal papers. It was the irrevocable deed of transfer for the grandmother, Dorothy Trust. The exact same document that Sarah had aggressively torn with the heavy gold pen during her feral, unhinged rage. I carefully smoothed out the crumpled edges and held it out toward my father. He looked at the torn papers with wide, confused eyes, slowly reaching out with trembling fingers to take them from my hand. You wanted my inheritance so desperately, I said, taking a deliberate step back from them. You violently wanted my money to fund your perfect fake legacy of black excellence. Well, here it is. You can keep the torn, worthless papers. But the $2 million is staying exactly where Grandmother Dorothy wanted it. I am going to use it to fully reimburse the church charity and the orphan fund that your precious golden boy completely drained. The community will get their stolen money back, but they will definitely never look at you the same way again. My mother let out a loud, tragic wail, burying her face entirely in her hands. My father stared down at the torn legal document, his hands shaking violently as the absolute finality of my words completely registered in his fractured mind. You have no family left, Thomas, I told my father, using his first name to permanently sever the final emotional tie. You traded your only loyal daughter for a corrupt police captain, and now you have absolutely nothing left to your name. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. I turned my back on them and walked straight toward the automatic sliding glass doors. I did not look over my shoulder even once. I walked out into the cool, refreshing night air, leaving them completely alone in the devastating ruins of their own making. Exactly 1 year has passed since I walked out into that cool, refreshing night air and left my toxic family in the devastating ruins of their own making. The justice system moves incredibly slowly, but when it finally strikes, it hits with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. Marcus did not get his highly anticipated police chief promotion. Instead, he received a 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. His corrupt police union friends completely abandoned him the very second his mugshot hit the national news networks. I actually received a letter from him last month written on cheap-lined prison paper begging for my forgiveness and desperately asking me to put money into his commissary account. I ran the letter straight through my office paper shredder without reading past the first pathetic sentence. He is no longer the untouchable golden boy of the city. He is just inmate number 8472, wearing an oversized scratchy orange jumpsuit and sweeping the cafeteria floors for 30 cents an hour. Sarah did not fare much better than her husband. She desperately tried to strike a plea deal by throwing Marcus completely under the bus, but the federal prosecutor already had all the bank authorization forms with her undeniable signature. She is currently serving 15 years in a federal minimum security facility. The government aggressively seized her luxury Aspen cabin, her imported cars, and her massive suburban house to pay back the stolen funds. Her wealthy country club friends now pretend they never even knew her name. As for my parents, their precious legacy of black excellence was entirely reduced to a massive community cautionary tale. My father was immediately forced to resign from his position as reverend. The church board voted unanimously to strip him of his generous pension after discovering how deeply he had enabled his corrupt son. He and my mother moved to a tiny, cramped apartment 2 towns over, living in absolute total obscurity. They have absolutely no social standing, no wealthy friends, and no golden child to proudly parade around. They are finally experiencing the exact same lonely, pathetic life they always cruelly predicted for me. My life, on the other hand, took a drastically different trajectory. I kept my promise to grandmother Dorothy. I completely liquidated the $2 million trust fund and legally transferred every single penny back into the Church Charity Foundation and the local Orphan Relief Fund. The Community Youth Center is finally being built exactly the way it was originally promised before Marcus and Sarah greedily drained the accounts. Professionally, my career at the Federal Bureau of Investigation skyrocketed. Taking down a massive racketeering ring led by a corrupt police captain and a precinct commander earned me a highly publicized commendation from the director of the FBI. I am no longer just a senior special agent. I was officially promoted to the regional director of the Anti-Corruption Task Force. I now have an entire floor of dedicated federal agents working directly under my command. I wear expensive tailored suits that I buy with my own hard-earned money, and I drive a reliable car that starts perfectly on the very first try. I completely rewrote my own legacy, and I did it without stepping on a single innocent person to get to the top. The fake federal badge Marcus tried to use against me is now permanently mounted in a glass display case in my corner office as a daily reminder of the night I finally took my absolute power back. And that brings us to the end of this incredible story. Thank you so much for listening to my journey of exposing my toxic family and serving them the ultimate plate of federal karma. If you enjoyed hearing how Marcus and Sarah got exactly what they deserved, please hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who might be dealing with their own narcissistic family members. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another crazy story. I want to hear from you in the comments section below. What was the absolute most satisfying moment of the takedown for you? Would you have forgiven the parents, or did they get exactly what was coming to them? Drop your thoughts down below and let us have a conversation. Remember, you are never obligated to tolerate toxic behavior just because you share the same blood. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and I will see you all in the very next video. The most profound lesson to draw from Kendra's harrowing experience is that personal integrity must always supersede toxic family loyalty. Society often pushes the narrative that blood is thicker than water, weaponizing this concept to force individuals to endure abuse, manipulation, and even criminal behavior from their own relatives. Kendra's story brilliantly dismantles this harmful myth. Her family was entirely obsessed with the superficial illusion of perfection and social status. Marcus and Sarah were willing to steal from vulnerable orphans and violently extort their own sister just to maintain a wealthy facade. Worse still, her parents were completely willing to sacrifice Kendra's future and freedom simply to protect their golden boy's fabricated reputation. They used the noble concept of community legacy as a convenient shield to hide their profound moral bankruptcy. Kendra's ultimate victory was not just about sending corrupt criminals to federal prison. It was about breaking a deeply ingrained cycle of generational manipulation. She recognized that true love does not require you to set yourself on fire to keep your abusers warm. By standing her ground and relying on her own hard-earned capabilities, she proved that your identity and self-worth are not defined by the toxic people who happen to share your DNA. Real excellence is built on honesty, accountability, and the courage to do what is right, even when it means walking away from the people who raised you. This story serves as a powerful reminder that setting firm boundaries is an absolute act of self-preservation, not a betrayal. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your own life and bravely distance yourself from anyone who demands your silence in exchange for their conditional love.